go ahead and speak without seeing it. I just didn't know if you were showing it to others. Okay, welcome everyone. Thank you for being here this evening. Our purpose in having this meeting was to review all of the work that you have done so far on the LCAP in terms of different stakeholder groups and focus groups meeting with us. LCAP PAC, LCAP Task Force, and our other parent groups have been working and giving us input throughout the year. We have two of our ELT members that I can see, Dr. Miller and Dr. Barnes are here this evening. And so we do have some information that has changed since we originally shared the agenda and had a plan. And so we have invited Dr. Barnes as a guest speaker to give us an update on what's happening legislatively with the LCAP. And we are still going to share the information we plan to share with you and then talk about where we go from here. So I will let Dr. Barnes take it from here.
Okay, can you hear me all right? Are you able to hear me?
Yes, yes, we can hear you.
All right, I did put a presentation together, so I'll try to share my screen. Okay, so I don't know who the host is. Are they able to let me share a screen or no?
I think Jeff is in the process of promoting you to a co-host, which will let you do that.
Thanks. Let's try it again.
Jeff, I think you may have to stop sharing your screen so that Leslie will be able to share hers.
Okay, let's see if this works. Share. Okay. Let me just try again. Do I need to open my system preferences? I don't understand why it's doing that.
I know on mine, when I click share screen, it'll ask you which window you would like to present, and then you select the window and click the blue share button.
Okay, when I do that, it says allow Zoom to share your screen. Okay, yes.
Yes.
Okay. And then something comes up asking me, let me see.
In the interim, Dr. Barnes, if you want to email that to me, I can share it from my screen over here.
Okay.
And thank you everyone for being so patient while we figure out all of these technical details.
Exactly. Okay, let me go back and to my email first.
I'll also take a moment to thank Collaborate PASadena for hosting this meeting for us this evening, and being willing to host other parent meetings, and always being so helpful to the school district. Also take a moment to recognize Mrs. Bailey, our board member, is also present, and Mrs. Kenny. I didn't see any other board members, so if I missed anyone, please let me know in the chat box.
Okay, David, you should be getting it.
I am in the process of pulling it up right now, and I will have it launched here momentarily.
Thank you. Okay, so I think we're ready now. I just wanted to go ahead and give everybody an idea of what we know to date as far as any additional funding sources that have been allocated to us, what we're hearing regarding upcoming budgets, and then the legislative changes that the LCAP was impacted by the governor's executive order, and I wanted to go over that for you. So if we can go to the next page. Okay. So there are several COVID-19 relief funding sources. And so the state issued a state bulletin for, or they did they allowed us to have $267,000 through SB 117. Pretty much they're all the same as far as how they can be spent, and that's on the right-hand side. So this money can be spent on distant learning systems, PD to support distance learning, any health, safety, or supplies, and then to help access and support for students with who are facing barriers to the distance learning. And so that's what that funding source can be used for. We also have the ability to apply for FEMA funding. And so we have applied for FEMA funding. Currently, we've only applied for money related to health and safety supplies because that's what they had originally told us. We're waiting for a case manager to be assigned to us. And once we get the case manager, then we'll go ahead and see if we can't apply for additional funds. So we, right now, just looking at the purchase orders and stuff that we have gathered, we're looking at about $366,000. I think I have an extra zero in there of expenses that we've seen, although I think that's growing. Under the CARE Act, there was a section for education stabilization, and there are two parts to this for the states, and one of them is the Governor's Emergency Relief Fund that goes by GEAR. We're hearing that that might be competitive if that is released and districts are allowed to use that, then it may be through a competitive grant. And so we're waiting to hear more on that one. The other is the Elementary and Secondary Emergency Relief Fund, and that one was based on our Title I funding, and our estimated amount to be received would be about $4.6 million. Under Title I, they did waive the carryover restrictions of 15%. So we were given some flexibility in that area. Title IV, there's flexibility on limits for technology expenditures. We normally take Title IV money and roll it into our Title II. So that's where we would be able to spend those funds. So the district's still expected to, still required to adopt its budget, its 2021 budget by June 30th. It'll be based on the estimates from the governor's May revise, and I believe that we'll hear about that on the 19th is when we'll actually hear from school services as to how that impacts our district directly. We may hear things coming out earlier, but that's usually statewide, and it's harder to figure out what the impact is to our individual district. And then the state, what we're hearing is they won't be finalizing their budget until August. And that's because the state and federal income tax filings have been extended to July 15th. And so, so with that one, they need to wait to see what their revenues are going to end up being. So once the state approves their budget, we may need to revise our budget. So that's what we're looking at this point. The governor did issue an executive order extending the deadline for the adoption of the LCAP for 2021 to December 15th. What that executive order did was it waived the Ed Code section regarding public review and adoption of the local indicators in conjunction with the adoption of the LCAP. So basically, however, it didn't waive the reporting requirements of the dashboard, so which include those local indicators. So those are not waived, but the deadline for the LCAP has been waived till December 15th. So included, we normally include our LCAP as part of our budget. The expenditures that would be included in the LCAP will still be part of our budget adoption. They just won't be separated and approved as a separate LCAP. And so what they're asking us to do instead is that they want a written report explaining any programmatic changes due to the school sites moving to distant learning. So they want to know in that written report the major impact on students and families, how the district was meeting the needs of the unduplicated students. And currently there's no form to be used, but CDE is in the process of creating that form for the report. So the template, metrics, stakeholder process, and annual update to be used for the 2021 LCAP's not yet been determined. And so they're saying that that's going to be detailed in future legislation. So we're kind of on hold at this point. I think that we've done a lot of work and we just need to continue with it. My guess would be that they're going to pretty much just roll over the current, use the current template because that's something that they're not making us use the other template. I did include the link to the executive order frequently asked questions. It answers a lot of questions for people, and we'll get this PowerPoint out to you so that you can use it. Next slide. So I get a lot of questions about the state reserves and the state rainy day fund. So I wanted to go through those. The state fund for economic uncertainty is pretty much at zero at this point. So they've transferred 1.3 billion from their reserve to respond to the COVID-19 expenditures. They do anticipate that this will be reimbursed by the federal government for the most part. There was a State Budget Stabilization Act, which is referred to as BSA, but better known as the Rainy Day Fund. And so there's two parts to this rainy day fund. One is that they set aside 1.5% of the general fund revenues and a portion of any excess capital gains that they received during the year. The other part is a safety net reserve, which was created in 1819. And those funds are basically to be used for California work opportunity or responsibility to kids and Medi-Cal. And that was created in 1819 when we were going through the 2008 recession, and there was a lot of cuts to medical or programs for students or programs for children, and so they created this other fund as well. So the BSA currently has $16.5 billion in it, and they are expecting that to be reduced by approximately $2 billion due to some capital gain losses. So that would leave $14.5 billion available for the budget shortfall if they were to agree to use it. I was part of a 5-star coalition call with Senator Portantino and also a representative of the state budget committee. And so when we asked about the rainy day fund, they said that they plan to use it over a 3-year period. They don't want to just use it all up in 1 year. So if you take that 14.5 divided by 3, that leaves about 4.8 billion per year over the next 3 years. School districts account for about 40% of that. And so we're hoping that means that we'd be eligible for about 1.92 billion over the next 3 years from this fund if they agree to use it. The safety net reserve, which is part of that BSA, currently has about 900 million in that, but that would be expected to go to help with job creation and healthcare and social programs for children. So there is a district-specific rainy day fund, which was approved as part of the reauthorization of Prop 2. And the first deposit was just made this year. When they created the 1920 budget, they made their first deposit of 377 million in that fund. And so that's all that's in there. That wouldn't go very far for us, but they may use it considering it just got there. So hopefully they'll free that up for us. So looking forward to our 2021 budget, the COLA was finalized today at 2.31. As part of the governor's January proposal, it had included a 2.29% COLA. So under normal circumstances, that would probably in the May revise be increased to 2.31. However, we're hearing it's probably unlikely that the COLA would be above 2% in the governor's May revise if we get a COLA at all. And I would imagine they would have to get the COLA from their reserves. And we're also hearing that this is, that going forward, that this is going to be much more difficult than the 2008 budget reductions that we went through. And that, you know, we're definitely going to be depending on flexibility to help us alleviate some of the reductions that we might see. Now, hopefully the 2008 went all the way to 2012. We're hoping that this is a dip and then comes back up again. It's really going to be dependent on how we recover once we're, you know, out and about and back at our job. So still a lot more to be seen, but hopefully that gives you a little bit of information. And you know, it's always a challenge with district budgets, but we are where we're at. So are there any questions or comments?
If anybody has any questions, just let me know in the chat section. And as of right now, I don't see any questions.
Okay.
Yeah, no questions. I am going to put a link in the chat section to a page on Collaborate PASadena that has a copy of the agenda and the presentation we're going to be seeing next, if anybody wants to get that at any point. All right, yeah, no questions. So.
In that case, next on the agenda would be a presentation of our April LCAP update, which I'm in the process of pulling up and getting ready to share on my screen. So bear with me while I transition to that. And first and foremost, for those of you that do not know who I am, my name is David Rennie. I am the district data facilitator and interim support for state and federal programs. And I have taken on a fairly large section of putting together the work that's going into our upcoming 21-22 LCAP development, as well as the 2021 LCAP. And I first and foremost want to say thank you all for joining us in this very non-traditional format and bearing with us as we navigate all of the technical details that come along with this type of meeting. But I really wanted to start first and foremost with framing what some of our successes and challenges and learnings have been through this very trying time. But being an educator, I feel it would be remiss if we didn't celebrate and highlight what we are doing well and what we have been learning throughout the entire process. And I feel one of the things that we have to celebrate is the fact that Pasadena really has taken the leadership in terms of rolling out distance learning and remote learning in a meaningful and strategic way that has really tried to honor the challenges that each person is experiencing, while at the same time maintaining to the commitment that we have to educate our children and our young members of the community. We intentionally rolled this out in a very phased approach, knowing that it was being done very rapidly. But to that point, we were able to say that we had curriculum in place with an online platform before schools ever experienced any closure. So the disruption and discontinuity to learning opportunities was very minimal from that standpoint. Some general challenges that we also faced in kind of navigating this was really that we did anticipate that there would be needs for technology access and internet access. What was more challenging was that the demand for that was much higher than we initially planned for and anticipated. And as we've been navigating this and really consolidating our learnings, what this is highlighting is that we as a district have really been leaning on our strong family communication channels as a way to let individuals know these are the services that we are still here providing, that we are still here to check the welfare of our families and our most vulnerable students. And also just really looking at how do we more strategically and meaningfully plan policies that also account for students with IEPs and also students that have contract services such as therapeutic services. So really, as we're moving forward and kind of doing our internal review process, we're taking these key learnings forward so that as things move to a new normal, we can come back to our policies and look at how do we plan and strategically implement these. What that means for us right now, as Dr. Barnes was highlighting, is that a lot of the timelines that we've been working on were thrown into a very large state of flux until just this week when we actually learned what were the new announcements around deadlines, timelines, what reports would be required at different points in time. So the LCAP timelines were originally dictated by state law, and there was no waiver or exception authority granted to the governor's office. However, that's now been given a case where through legislative process, the governor's office has been able to give those executive orders now. The kind of interesting side note to that is the waivers that were granted didn't excuse us from certain state components, such as the submission of dashboard data. So those timelines may change as well. But what we as a internal LCAP working group have kind of committed to is that even if this LCAP cycle had been completely canceled and we were not required to submit an LCAP, the phases and process that are unique to the LCAP should still be something that we engage in as a continuous improvement cycle. So to give some general background around what we are engaging with as an LCAP work group is we're really dividing things into two different sets of indicators. We have state indicators that are absolutely given to us by state assessments, college graduation rates, career and college readiness indicators. But then we also have local indicators that are really more about how we as a school district are monitoring ourselves, engaging our progress from year to year. And some of those would include our access to a broad course of study. Some of those would also include the implementation of academic standards. And while the state has given self-reflection tools for the district to utilize, it's really our internal processes that are guiding that discussion and really looking year over year, how are we committing certain actions to improve those different local indicators? So in trying to address all 8 of these different focus areas, we really came up with this idea of the phased process of an LCAP being developed is starting with a needs assessment that is data-driven, that can inform what are the goals that you hope to achieve as a district. And from those goals being defined, we then account for what are those metrics that we're going to monitor that are indicators of success or challenges that we're experiencing as we're rolling out those very specific intended actions to achieve those goals. And by developing the actions, it becomes incumbent upon us as a district to really monitor and update those actions. And what's interesting is that while this is experienced in a linear fashion in the development process of an LCAP over a 3-year cycle, this is continually engaged in year over year, because with the annual update, you're always going back to, these were our original needs. Now that we've done our needs, let's check to see if we're on track to meet our goals by reviewing the metrics, updating actions, and then continuing to monitor that. That process has not changed. It's just simply the timeline that we're working in now has shifted a lot of our work to, well, we may need to take some of the work that we were developing for our current LCAP cycle and just shift the feedback and continue to engage with our stakeholders so that we know exactly where we're headed and how we should adjust this. So that brings us to the work that we've already achieved this year. Our district has worked with a task force group that has met over 6 working sessions. And at each of those different work sessions, there was really a different focus of how are we driving the LCAP forward in some way, whether it be through a metrics review, a refinement of goals, or really looking at the new LCAP template that has been put on pause. As we went through this process, we always kept in mind that really our 5 broad goals are something that we were operating with the idea that we're dealing with student achievement, teacher capacity, and quality curriculum. Goal number 3 really being about school climate and student safety, parent and community engagement being involved with our goal 4, and goal 5 really being about district systems and processes. And that was kind of like our initial starting point. Through some internal discussions, we really gathered some feedback from our different stakeholder groups, and really what emerged from those different stakeholder gatherings was that we really needed to kind of hone in a little bit deeper on what do we mean when we say student achievement in relationship to the California dashboard. The irony being that there's not going to be a California dashboard as we know it next year, but still knowing that that is kind of our accountability system. So as an internal working group, we started to develop the idea of really embedding very specific sub-goals within the broad goal 1 that highlights our English learner target group and foster youth target group, in part because the district currently is in differentiated assistance around those 2 very specific target groups. And we wanted to highlight the fact that we were committing to highlighting that in our next 3-year LCAP cycle. Keeping the rest of the goals fairly similar, the main shift that we wanted to start looking at as we really looked at what was the enshrined actions and metrics for goal 5 is we kind of shifted it more to a compliance monitoring and continuous improvement goal, because it really centered the district office more as a support provider directly to school sites, rather than just this abstract entity that was there saying departments needed key performance metrics. We really wanted to dive deeper into why do departments need key performance metrics, and how are those key performance metrics really linking to the direct school supports. That was the direction that
I
were heading in.
So people were, I caught the second part of it. So people.
Just checking in, Jeff. Was there something that we needed to? Yep. Okay. So from that point, as we were approaching the work, we really decided at this point for this particular town hall, highlighting some of our learnings that we were engaging in as we were going through and providing some of the analysis for the annual update, and also looking at how we would kind of translate all of this. So you'll see that as we're presenting this, we have columns on the right-hand side that are indicators of where the item was located in the 1920 LCAP and how we were looking at possibly reorganizing them into the new upcoming LCAP. But the process of how this actually would work in a traditional LCAP cycle is you would start with your annual review of what we did. and then perform an analysis to say, of what we did, how did it work out? What was improved? What was not improved? What are some challenges for implementation that we may not have foreseen? And from there, we would be able to say, we have new LCAP goals and actions. And from there, we would then say, this is what we would do next. That is the entire through line from the annual update and review all the way to what our new rollout is. Coming through our annual LCAP update, some key learnings that we've already seen just from our various goals is that we have pretty much remained flat when it comes to talking about graduation rates for almost every single target subgroup. However, we have risen in almost every single student group, our A through G completion rates. And part of what that success has really pointed to is that our CTE pathways, which have been diversified, are a very, very strong component to that. It's not the only solution, but it's what we are seeing right now as work that we've been engaging in that has been very fruitful. Our English learners and our foster youth, they still have some very persistent achievement gaps, but we see that now specifically within our data, and that's why we recommended the work task goal of really highlighting some of those gaps within our goal 1 specifically. So as we're moving forward, we really want to look at focusing on early grades literacy and embedding targeted student subgroups to highlight those achievement inequities and gaps for targeted students, and still continue to diversify our instructional pathways. Moving into goal 2, really key outcomes that we looked at was as we started looking at how our instructional coaches really impacting overall quality of professional development, we saw that there's a strong infrastructure now in place so that teachers are not just receiving professional development, but also have an avenue to receive coaching support and ongoing engagement within professional development. And our learnings and takeaways have really been around refining specifically how those coaching models could also help address the accommodations and needs of students that are students with disability, low socioeconomic, and English learners, as those have been the 3 groups during our distance learning and remote learning phases that have really highlighted that our policies have more work to craft to consider what are these specific target group needs. And our learning coaches are one avenue that we've seen is capable of addressing some of it, but is not the overall solution. So we have more work to do around that. Within goal 3, our school climates, one of the things that we've really taken the time to learn about is that we have made a lot of gains within our foster youth attendance and suspension rates. At the same time, we're really looking at how do we wrap further services around foster youth to address their graduation needs. And this has been something that we have begun to do in the work as we've begun aligning kind of CWASC and CIPD and academics goals, as well as our particular health services. And really looking at how do we integrate all of this so that we have this articulated in a way so that all students are served, but also the needs of foster youth are identified in a way that is not singling them out, while also integrating those students' voices in a meaningful way. Family engagement is really something that we have been working with as a task force, and this came out of our conversations through the task force, but also really internally, really trying to find meaningful metrics that move beyond just how much training and how much engagement to really the quality of the engagement that we're seeing across the district. And so as we've been learning through that, really just trying to take some time to drive our metrics more towards levels of, or away from levels of engagement, and looking at how do we develop meaningful measurements of what quality looks like within family engagement. And that is, again, what we are using to move forward. More to come on that as I'm thinking out loud. And then for goal number 5, We're currently in a system where all of our departments are now engaging in internal reporting on what they perceive as their key performance metrics. Really what we're starting to learn is that as we've looked across the different departments, there is an internal review that should be explored of what were the learnings that we've gained internally. And by really saying we would like to learn what we've learned, how do we move those ideas into a more formal process? So really looking at clarifying goal 5 more as the central office becoming a reflective practitioner in support of school sites. And again, these are all recommendations. These have not been necessarily presented to any group to say, yes, this is the direction that we're definitely going in, but these are just our initial draft annual updates as of April. So what we have done already to kind of make this a little bit more transparent and to also collect some inputs and ideas is all of the documents that were presented here are available in English and Spanish, and they'll be posted on the Special Programs and State and Federal Programs webpage, which is our PUSD domain/65 page. And we've also put out 2 surveys that are just a way for individuals to give us concerns, questions, input, and comments, very specifically in English and in Spanish. They're through Google Forms. You can fill them out multiple times if you would like to. We've even asked for email addresses, but you are not required to type in an email address, so that if there's something that needs to be followed up with, we have that avenue and that capacity to address that through a follow-up feedback. And I would like to say thank you so much for giving me your time and your attention. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen and see if there were any questions.
Hi, David. This is Benjamin. How are you doing?
I'm doing well.
Good. Something just caught my eye as we were doing your presentation. And I just want to, it's not a question, but just something that comes to my mind. I mean, is there a time frame in terms of when you're talking about English learners and people with disability that closing the gap, or you're just going, it's just going to be a gradual structure that each year you're going to look at the data and then implement new programs along as you go along, or there's a time frame for achieving those goals?
That's a great question. So there's actually 2 parts to the answer. The first part is the review of the data occurs every time that we are prompted to do an annual update, which under a normal LCAP cycle would be every year. What I have been coaching schools as a data facilitator to really look at is when you're looking at goals and setting goals on summative state assessments like our SBAC ELA, or CASP ELA, CASP math exams, is really to look at what their current performance level is on the dashboard. So for example, let's say school X has English language learners performing in a red category. While red is the overall color coding, it doesn't tell us a whole lot about what growth, what change would we need to see as a school site to really get students to the next level of performance. And so what we've been engaging in is really that conversation of, let's look at how far from meeting standard the average group is, in this case, English learners. And then let's talk about what change we would need to just have them move up 1 level of color. So if they're at red, what would it take to get them to orange? But then let's take that 1 step further, because while it's great to move up 1 color, nobody wants to be at orange. What would it take then to move to yellow? With the ultimate goal of how do we eventually get to blue? But really setting achievable targets in the standpoint of what we've been working with schools, and what I've also been taking as my position moving forward with some of the writing, has been for our targeted student subgroups, really formulating a goal that says, this is what it would take to get to 1 level of improvement in coloring, 2 levels of improvement in coloring. And once we get to at least yellow, continuing to progress towards green and blue, because yellow is not an okay place to stay. I'm always a fan of, you should be trying to push forward, but what's the specific amount of change? Depending on what student group you're talking about and in what year, the amount of change is going to be different depending on when you do the review. So that's to answer, when would it happen? It would happen yearly, but the timetable that we're planning for is, what is the progress that we want to see across all 3 years as we're writing that goal. And I do want to just take a moment to look at the chat to see if anyone has asked any questions in the chat.
Yeah, Kim asked the last 2 lines.
So how will the district involve stakeholders in the budgeting process by June 30th? How will the district meet? I know that I am about to send out an email after this town hall to the LCAP task force that will also be a joint meeting with the LCAP PAC for a May 6th meeting. That's to really get an update on timelines and where we're at to engage as a stakeholder feedback process. As for budgeting process, I can't speak directly, excuse me, to how Dr. Barnes was intending with getting any of that. However, we do know what some of our stakeholders have been giving us as feedback throughout the course of this entire year. And I don't want to discount that feedback as being useful. I do recognize that that was given during a much different time period. I also have been really thinking through, how are we going to engage our stakeholders to find out what were some of their needs that we may not be aware of during the COVID-19 school closures. That's part of what I'm interested in also looking at, because that will also help to inform not necessarily all of the budget, but at least some of the budgetary needs that we may need to consider. And how will the district make the report process and budget decisions transparent?
So David,
that I can, yeah,
just
go ahead.
Here, so typically when we're planning the budget for next year and the programs for next year, we're doing the LCAP and the budget together. So the state's decision to decouple them means that the existing process for making things transparent and engaging stakeholders goes away, but all the same decisions will be made by June 30th. So now we need a replacement, if you will, for the LCAP process. So I don't think most people find our budget documents transparent, and they typically only come out about a week ahead of time before the budget is approved in June. And by the way, it'll be summer by then anyway. Yeah. So, and I'm not saying that this is a question to you, but that same involvement in understanding how we're going to be spending our money next year, either we're not going to engage anyone at all in it, or we have to come up with another process. So in case you can't tell, I'm not a big fan of moving the LCAP process, because we have to do something similar anyway.
Right, and I think there's really 2 different parts to that. One part is the fact that this one specific LCAP deadline was moved, and the new 3-year cycle development process was also moved, is really 2 different parts of the same issue. One of the things that we've internally been talking about is really just treating the development of the 2021 LCAP as a more or less rollover of the current LCAP, so that at least that particular portion of actions and what budget is going where is at least intact and a starting point to be transparent. It's certainly not the best solution. There could always be more transparency, in my opinion. That's something that I'm thinking through of, as we start to think through how do we develop the new 3-year cycle LCAP that comes after this, that's the other part that I'm really also kind of leaning in towards, knowing that, yes, we do have a December deadline for our annual update. We also have a deadline that comes after that, and really thinking through those 2 separate issues. And I know that doesn't completely answer your question, but it's definitely something that I think Dr. Barnes, myself, and others within the district are also looking at in terms of trying to consider how do we make the best of a flawed process, given the fact that it's on such a compressed timetable now. Laura was asking, how will recommendations from parents groups such as DLAC be incorporated into the LCAP? For example, one of the concerns of DLAC's groups is the current allocation of coaches across schools, which though equal because schools get coaches, some schools may have higher needs for support than others, yet the same allocation. Again, one of the starting points, and again, I'll say as a starting point, rolling over the current LCAP is just that starting point. However, we also recognize that we're closing some schools down. And so that left us with a opportunity to really say, well, we have 4 additional coaches then. How do we allocate those 4 different coaches? And that is something that I know that Dr. Blanco has been talking about. I don't have exact concrete plans in front of me, so I don't want to misspeak or possibly put anyone under the illusion that there has been a decision made about that explicitly that I can talk to. But I can say that there have been some questions brought up of how do we make the allocation of instructional coaches slightly more equitable, knowing that different schools have different balances of need.
Thank you. Yes, I think that the question of equal versus equitable keeps coming up.
So I'll take a moment to respond to that and say that that is our base, and differentiation begins by adding to the base, and we are looking at that, and we have done that. So we've been able to do that through the magnet grant, and if you look at staffing across the district, it is not equal. There are schools that have greater needs that have more support staff out of the classroom to address those needs. So I think we just need to do a better job of showing actually the differentiated allocations that we're able to provide. And we don't have 4 additional coaches. We were able to have 2 additional coaches that will be addressing needs in a differentiated way. And then we have 1 temporary position that's going to help with the transition of one of our schools. So I know that question has come up in the parent meetings I've been in, and I also have asked Linda, who is also here, that's helped us with the LCAP before as a consultant, to look at every school and create a profile of the staff that we actually have there so we can clarify this question that comes up often.
Thank you very much. I know I keep asking at every meeting I go to, just because parents keep asking, especially for English learners, if a school seems to have, say, 5 levels, kinder through 5th, and a high number of English learners, and they get a coach, and another school maybe has 3 levels and 30 English learners or whatever, how do they allocate that? So I'm just asking on parents who keep asking. Thanks.
So taking a look at another question of, on goal 5, the current goal is being effective, efficient, and transparent. Does the change to compliance monitoring make sense? To address that, this update that we brought forward in April was a very, what's the word I'm looking for? It was almost this is the work that we've engaged in, and this is the first time that it's been presented outside of that work group to see what do we need to calibrate around and make sense. The intent wasn't to shift goal 5 to a compliance monitoring goal in any way, other than what we were really thinking about was, for example, I believe it was in either goal 1 or goal 2 currently. I want to say goal 2 currently. We actually create and fund CIPD, the Department for Curriculum Instruction and Professional Development. But then CIPD as a department is able to take actions that directly impact goal 2 as well. to decouple that and really kind of clarify the bounds that we were putting around goal 5, because that was also one of the hardest goals for us to really develop metrics for, was to really take any action that was funding a department or establishing a department and put that in goal 5 as a central office goal. So that then what we can do is we could actually house that as a separate metric set that actually would look at how is CIPD operating as a department independently of the actions that it might be impacting within other goals. So from that side, it's not really a compliance, it's more of a how is this department really providing supports directly to schools or teachers or students, even though it is a department that's housed within the central office. That was really the shift that we were wanting to get to goal 5. And after hearing some of the questions and initial feedback around that, not just from you, but also from Dr. Blanco, who's been sending me emails as well, asking for clarifications, that's still work that as an internal work group, we still need to clarify what the intent of that shift was and how to better communicate it. And I am looking through the chat, and I don't see any other questions right now. But if there are no other questions or comments,
I think one of the questions that we might have missed is how will recommendations from parent groups such as DLAC be incorporated into the LCAP? Did we talk about that?
I can speak a little bit to around how that will happen, or the mechanisms. Right now, for the budget adoption, I can't really speak to how parent input will get put into the budget adoption, because again, that's on such a compressed timeline right now. Knowing that we are performing a delayed annual update, taking some of that feedback and rolling it into the annual update, which would have initially also included changes to the 3-year LCAP plan, really would have been this time for us to consolidate that. I know that my intention right now is to really continue to engage with the task force meeting, which has some parents from DLAC, and then also still get the feedback and formal recommendations from our DLAC and integrate that into a meaningful consideration as we write that annual update. I think that really just the goal that I have in pushing the LCAP forward is to not abandon any of our stakeholder inputs, but recognize that because the schedules are changed, how we actually still move forward with those groups is just a matter of sitting down and saying, here's where our key decision points are, and how are we going to gather feedback up to those key decision points. I personally will reach out to our DLAC to kind of coordinate where we're at and what we need from DLAC as far as like recommendations or feedback, and really start to build out what that would look like, at least from the work that I'm driving.
There's a question around metrics, and the task force hasn't had an update on metrics and targets for several months. Where are we with those?
So the task force having updates with metrics and targets. Targets have been something that has been a bit trickier to negotiate as I've been approaching the update, because I was not involved with the target setting. So it's been a learning process for me to see a target and not know how that target was arrived at, or what was the process that went into setting that target. but then seeing the summative outcomes and having to say, yes, we met the target, or no, we did not. So part of what I've been approaching the target setting, or at least the annual update side of the LCAP from, is given the results of our summative metrics, what were our successes? What are some potential areas that we can highlight as effective actions that have been taken? And where do we still continue to see persistent or historical gaps in student achievement or inequity of student outcomes? For example, if we see that results in one metric have risen across all student groups, but they haven't risen in the same way, that would be something that I might highlight as I'm doing the annual update. As far as proposed metrics for the next 3-year cycle, I don't have an answer for that right now, in part because I just took over a lot of this work about a month or two ago and had not thought to bring forward the metrics after the initial September meeting, September or October meeting, where we did propose some of those metrics.
So are you saying that even though at that, in September and October when we met, we're going to delete some metrics, add some new metrics, modify some others, is that not going to be implemented yet? Is that the answer?
My understanding was that those metrics were for inclusion, modification, and deletion in the next 3-year LCAP cycle.
Okay.
And because that 3-year LCAP cycle has been delayed effectively for 1 more year, it would be integrated into that 3-year cycle where for right now, basically what we're looking at for next school year is a continuation of the metrics and goals that we have currently.
Great, thank you.
And I apologize, my cat has decided to crash our Zoom meeting here. And then from LG, we should have a coach for only ELs as it was before, because the support for the students has been practically lost, and when they are reclassified, they no longer monitor for 4 years, and their level of education is low, translated from Spanish. Dr. Blanco, would you want to speak to this a little bit, because it's referencing some historical background that I may not be able to speak to?
Sure. We were, prior, I think when we first went into LCFF, had additional funding where we were able to have a coach that was classified as an LDRT that focused primarily on English learners. And most of us at this meeting have been here through the iteration of coaches and not being able to sustain the coaches. We even tried sharing at one point, and that didn't really work at all. And that's when we decided the base is 1, and then we add additional support on top of that. I know that Mr. Rellis is here as well, and he does plan to give schools that have additional higher numbers of English learners some choices in the tutoring program, and also extra support for instructional assistant / clerk aides, a position that was developed and put into the LCAP to support English learners 3 years ago when I arrived to the district, but there was actually no funding behind it. And we have piloted this model in a couple of the high schools. They have used their own funding to pay for the position and have reported it to be successful. So I know that some of our schools have had a more difficult time than others recruiting teachers to work after work and be part of the tutoring program. So he was going to open up this option to see what support could be most beneficial to the school in supporting English learners. In terms of the monitoring for reclassification, that is certainly a requirement, and I will let Mr. Ellis, if he's on here, speak to how that's done through the LAD department.
Hello, everyone. Mr. Rillis speaking on behalf of the LAD department. We did touch on some of these topics at our recent DLAC meeting on Monday. The concern has been raised a number of times, definitely, as to the schools that need support in the areas of high numbers and high percentages of English learners. I can say personally, having been an LDRT with the district many years ago, there was that time when there was a specialization of duties for CRT, which at that time was a curriculum resource teacher, as well as an LDRT that provided direct support to the students that were identified as English learners, as well as their families, and those teachers that had high numbers of ELs. Of course, as time has passed, that has been consolidated into this instructional coaches, and at the point where there's one coach per school that has quite a number of responsibilities to take on. So to support our students as well as the teachers, definitely, is that we proposed providing instructional assistance, bilingual instructional assistance in the classroom to support definitely the teachers at the secondary level, where we see a high number of our LTELs that have not made any progress who have yet to reclassify, which would then free up the coaches from doing a lot of compliance paperwork, a lot of forms that they need to submit and such, freeing them up so they can better support the classes, better support the students, and better support the overall school. That, in addition to some of the other programs we bought on, such as after-school interventions, district-wide supplementary resources in the form of a scholastic magazine that goes hand in hand with our balanced literacy initiative. But I could say definitely in regards to our DLAC president mentioning a school such as Roosevelt that is being consolidated and then going into Madison, that school is going to be impacted severely by a high number of English learners. So from my understanding, I'm understood that the school will get that support when it comes to having coaches that will be more than just one, that will be able to help the English learners at that school.
Juan, there was a few more comments from LG that I put in the chat. I don't know if that's to be addressed.
Let's see, LAD should take over 100% of the coaches. Since until today, LAD cannot give anything without the consent of the directors. Working together with CIPD and Director Helen Hill, I'd say that our collaboration works well. I can share that this year we had a number of professional development series in which we provided all-day support to the coaches in the form of integrated and designated ELD, EL strategies that they could provide directly into their classrooms, as well as a coaching cycle, which was kind of like a mentor and mentee format. It was a year-long coaching session. It was one day out of the week, but it was an entire day that was devoted just to the coaches, in which we provided that one-to-one support. And at the secondary level, we provided 4 pull-out days just for the ELD secondary teachers, which was much more refined in supporting those students at the secondary level. I have indicated to the DLAC that as far as being able to regulate or go onto a campus and tell the coaches what to do or how to run their day-to-day assignments and responsibilities, that's a collaborative work that needs to have the principal involved, as well as the CIPD department, so that we're all working together in unison and that we're all on the same page. I mean, given the fact that definitely the coaches have a significant amount of work that they do, not only on a daily basis, but throughout the year. And our part as a department is just trying to alleviate any type of hard work that they may have on their plate, which is a lot. So some of the items that we may do or that we have provided is is substitute support in the form where with the principal, we'll provide anywhere between 2 to 3 substitutes or however many they may ask. And the teachers will come out of the classroom and then there'll be a little bit more refined support that the coach can work with that person and then identify whatever needs there are in place. We also look to some of our schools that are performing exceptionally well, such as Longfellow, such as Blair, that serve as model schools in which we can replicate what's happening at that school site. We had also Wilson in the mix in this year, in which we were able to tour the classrooms and see some of the strategies that were utilized in there. So I'd say it's more of a sense of working together rather than taking over the coaches. And then I'm now reading, should I just keep going, Jeff?
Yes, there was also something from Laura that you may want to address just above that too.
Okay, I think I lost my place.
So, I could address the first comment from Laura, and then you can address the second, is that are there data that summarizes the needs of each school alongside of the kind of supports that are available? That is the school plan, right? The SIPSA, and our schools have just finished the SIPSA, and the process is based on data, many different kinds of data, but the California dashboard, and also if they've been identified in one of the tiers for a targeted assistance or comprehensive school assistance, and the funding, it matches the students' needs, and then departments are asked to look at schools that are identified as a targeted assistance, because that there's not money that comes with that identification. And so we give additional services. And that's part of the department plans. So we do, we have lots of data now. The ITS department, based on feedback from parents, I think it was 2 years ago now, created a website which has all of our data in a uniform fashion, so all schools can look at data in the same way when they're planning. And then we have the dashboard data that really has been refined more each year and has more usable formats for families. We belong to the Core Data Collaborative, which allows us to look at even a deeper level of growth. And so you might see a school that looks like it's persistently failing, but the core data system allows us to see how much growth in even a more in-depth way than you would see on the regular California dashboard. So if you feel that the site administrator needs help in supporting, parent groups and showing them data, that was one of the reasons that we hired a data facilitator. And in our department that works on instructional technology, there's a research wing, and that's where Ani works, and she's a research analyst and also helps with analyzing the data. So we wanted to have 2 roles, one person that could go out that was a practitioner that came from the classroom more recently, and then our analyst that helped us see things from a research point of view. So I'm not sure why there would be a feeling of not being able to make recommendations based on data throughout our school year.
If I could just clarify that, sorry about that. I think I'm just more specifically speaking, because it's one of the groups of concern, speaking about English learners. When groups gather, like the DLAC group, we go around, there's a presentation from the Law Office about what things have been done, and then we go around and people talk about what their schools are doing. There isn't a sense, or at least I haven't seen it, in one place of, okay, here are all the schools, here's, and I know we've gotten the reclassification rates, but there isn't also something of like, okay, this school already got their tutors, and it's, they got them in whatever, November, and they're helping so many kids, and they have, one coach, and they have this extra assistant. That sort of big, you know, it's just a summary of simpler things, not so in depth, but more like how many English learners do we have? How are they doing? What kind of supports are available? That way we're more clear, because we may be asking for things that we already have. Or perhaps, you know, not asking for something that is working very well at some other school and we just don't know about it. So I think that's what I'm talking about, just some sense of best practices, what are things that are working, so parents have that idea and can help remind administrators. I think that's where my mind is on this.
Okay, so I do agree with you, Mrs. Diaz, that we listen to our stakeholders, and we do create actions and action plans upon their feedback. We don't do the best job in reporting back what we've done because of the feedback, and that's something that we're trying to get better at. And you know, I see this comes up in many meetings where I know that we've changed course on implementation. Departments have made changes based on feedback, and we just have to get better at doing what you're asking for, reporting. Here's what you asked for, here's what we did, and here's the result. So
Simply, in a simple way, because most of us just don't, you know, we're not trained in statistics. We don't, you know, so just simply, you ask for this, you know, we're doing it, or we're not doing it because of this reason, or we're working on it. Just something, and also it may be that we say, you know what, we started piloting this at these schools for this reason, and as soon as we know more about it, we will, you know, we will spread it to other schools, just so that it's all in one place. I think that, and I know it's hard to do, but that I think would be helpful to groups like the DLAC to know what's working and where the money's being spent. It's otherwise very complicated, and we may be asking for things that are unnecessary perhaps, and not, again, asking for things that are working well somewhere and we just don't know about it. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Relish, you may want to add more.
Oh, I'm sorry. Looking over the comments that were provided recently concerning rates and reclassification rates. Yes, just agreeing with Dr. Blanco and what you have said. There are a number of items or a number of things that we do address in the schools, and that will be now handled, and we'll make sure that we make better time to present them so that they're in digestible pieces for our parents, and that you can see the things that are happening at our school sites.
Right, I do have, oh, yeah.
Go ahead,
David?
Go ahead, Jeff.
I was just going off another question, unless you wanted to follow up with what one was saying.
Oh, no, I was going to move to the next question. So you were beating me to the punch.
So there was one, there's a couple from Kim in there, but yeah, there was one asking about who AAPC should submit their LCAP recommendations to, and is there a deadline for submitting?
I would say that any group that would like to submit feedback specifically around the LCAP, in lieu of having an official answer to that, I will say you're welcome to email it to me, and I will get it to the correct person if I'm not the most appropriate person. Just that is something where navigating who to send it to should not be the barrier to getting that feedback. I am on that work group, and if I'm not the most appropriate person, I will get it to the most appropriate person.
Is there a time frame also to?
For the sake of Expedia, or expediacy, that, hello, helps if I actually use my right words. I would say obviously sooner rather than later, but I would say right now, target frame-wise, a lot of my work will be really coming under pressure towards the end of May, so getting anything to me by mid-May at the latest would at least afford me time to go through it and read it as I'm starting to develop that under pressure writing and planning.
Great. So yeah, there was a couple from Kim, one on chronic absenteeism that's up for a little bit, and then the ELA and math scores.
So finding Kim's chronic absenteeism hasn't improved in several years. What are we doing differently next year? Had this been our 3-year cycle, I could have possibly answered a little bit around what some of the context is around that, given the whole COVID-19 and possibly there needing to be a change around lots of different things that may be emerging out of health concerns, also just general mental health awareness and trauma that our students have been experiencing. Also just the uncertainty of going back to a school that we perceive to be safe, and now we have this lingering, potentially unsafe mentality of concern. That is something that I can't speak to fully. What I can say is our plans really have centered more around looking at how to strengthen the connection between our service providers for mental health and also looking at our community advocates to engage students to understand the awareness and the importance of attending school every day. This action has also been something that we've driven into each of the school sites as a goal that they have to submit a attendance improvement plan, more or less. And then paired with that is really a conversation that I've been driving with some schools that also need to address simultaneously high rates of suspension, because in some cases your chronic absenteeism and your suspension are really intertwined. Students are not present in the classroom because they've been suspended. And for chronic absenteeism, it's not about if it was a suspension or an illness. An absence is an absence. So that's been a conversation that I've also been addressing on that side that I can speak a little bit to. As I get more information, at this point, I'm kind of just been listening to the different departments and kind of consolidating what our learnings and discoveries have been and how are we documenting that we're moving forward with a certain action or course of action. I know that doesn't necessarily fully answer that question, but that's the starting point that I'm operating from. And then Kim's other question was both ELA and math scores for 11th graders went down last year, as well as A through G. If graduation rates are also flat, what plans do we have to improve outcomes in high schools? I haven't had a chance to actually sit down with each and every last one of the high school principals, so I can't speak to high schools as a general group. What I can say is that we have been looking at how to be more strategic in the targeting of interventions at the high school level and how to create more robust monitoring systems. So that when students transition out of 8th grade and go into 9th grade, that there's not this gap that they experience in, say, math performance monitoring, for example, where they get to 11th grade year and now they have a high stakes summative assessment in their 11th grade year. And we didn't have a way of tracking what their progress was in 9th grade and 10th grade. Those are individual site-by-site conversations that I've had with a few principals. It hasn't been all of the principals that are high school principals. The same goes with our ELA. It's a little bit more easier to track at least the reading and literacy component within ELA because of the fact that we do have HMRI for the middle school and secondary schools. The other side to that same question that's been interesting, because I was looking at this, was that overall, our A through G completion rates have been either kind of trending a little bit downwards. Sometimes they stay a little flat, but it's also our college and career readiness indicator has also been an interesting indicator to put this next to, in the sense of our CTE pathways have been providing a means for us to increase that particular indicator, while we may not also be progressing the A through G indicator as strongly as we would like to have that. So each of those are a slightly different blend that's going to depend on which school you're talking about, because some schools have a stronger CTE program. And CTE is not something that I'm as familiar with.
So we
We had
do
a-
have a couple high school principals joining us. I want to give them an opportunity if they would like to. I saw Dr. Anderson on here, I believe, and Mr. Ibarra to address that question.
Well, just to put a little more context, we had a presentation at a Collaborate PASadena meeting earlier this year when they presented to us from the Skills Summer School. And I don't know if that's going to go on this year. I don't know if anyone on the call does. But in past years, what they found, and these are kids who are, I think, either coming out of 7th, going into 8th, or coming out of 8th and going into 9th, they were finding that these students were very, very behind. And so I guess what I'm trying to say, it's not just a high school issue. It is something that may have started before high school. So we see the results. And so I heard what you said, David, about tracking, you know, and putting more tracking in 9th and 10th, but it sounds like we may have also a high school readiness issue. And I don't know if we've been looking at having a high school readiness indicator or some kind of tracking.
So first I'll see if either of the high school principals would like to say anything, and then I will respond to the readiness question.
Sorry, Dr. Blanco, this is Mark Anderson. I'm multitasking. I was reading emails. What is the question?
The question is both ELA and math scores for 11th grade went down last year, as well as A through G. If graduation rates are also flat, what plans do we have to improve high school outcomes? So I thought maybe you or Mr. Ibarra would like to share some of the interventions and strategies that you use.
Sure. I know that, excuse me, that varies a lot by school site. And the scores overall, if you're looking between 8th, if you're looking at growth mindset, how the kids did in 8th grade to how they grew to 11th grade, that actually improved. So if you're looking at, the growth of the class of 2018 to 2019 went down, but how 2019 did in 8th grade to how they did in 11th grade, we grew at a better rate than the state did. So it just depends how you're looking at that data. And then we do provide a lot of interventions for the students and providing, whether it be academic interventions for it. And with the college and career readiness, there's the A through G is one piece of it. And then how they're measuring it on the dashboard is a little bit different. It's actually a bit more rigorous with having additional meeting proficiencies at both math and English or a pathway, et cetera. And I can only speak to my school. I know that we flatlined. We're in kind of the mid 60s right now and trying to find ways to help lift that up. And the graduation rate, you know, I don't know how that is at the other schools, but I mean, ours is really high. We're like 96%. The good news is this year, it's like everyone's going to graduate because of the no Fs. So we should see our graduation rate go up this year. But, you know, math is the bigger issue than English, although everything is connected and the literacy. So it could be that the literacy in English is carrying over to math, but you're not seeing the growth at math as well or as much as they're moving up. But we don't provide additional classes. You don't want to take away an art. You know, if I already don't like math, 2 periods of math is not going to make me like it more. So we're trying to provide in-class interventions. We partnered with PCC, and the first semester they paid for the tutors, and the second semester we paid, and it was during the school day where we'd pull the kids out of class, work with them, provide them the one-on-one assignments. And we did a lot of work around vertical articulation, using our graduate defense as a benchmark. So if every senior has to do this by the time they graduate, what should they have to do by 11th grade? What should they have to do by 10th grade? What should they have to do by 9th grade? And all the teachers worked on it, and we did it across all curricular areas, and it was in reading, writing, speaking, and math. And that has helped us just prepare that it's not just an 11th grader or 12th grader teacher's responsibility to get them to graduate, but it's something that we're all working on in a cohesive school.
Thank you. Is Mr. Ibarra still on here? He might have had to step away. But every high school has, you know, interventions like Dr. Anderson is describing. And one of the focuses that we really have is focusing on individual students, right? And how do we move the students to the next level. And so sometimes when you see the data aggregated, you're not seeing that individual student growth. And so I think it's really important to remember that we do try to dial down to the individual child for every student and create plans that show how they're moving forward. This year, Mr. Rellis and the LAD department went out to every high school with data to sit down with every principal and talk about long-term English learners and create a strategy and a personal support plan for them. So as I mentioned earlier, I think sometimes we're doing a lot, but we're not articulating back what we're doing. We've been working on an early warning system for 2 years. We ran some trials on it, and then because we got a little sidetracked developing some other data systems and ways for parents to see the data, it got put to the side a little bit, but that's something that Ani has helped us with, and we're ready to relaunch it so we can look at attendance, grades, discipline factors, which are shown by research to be the indicators of student success. And our goal is to look at those indicators at, the matriculation grades. We also belong to a collaborative called California Ed Partners, a grant that we wrote, and we've been focusing on continuous improvement through that grant. Dr. Miller is also on the team with us and leads continuous improvement in the district, and that particular group has been focusing on English learners with school districts all across the state. And we're trying to create bright spots and study and learn from, where things are really going well for students, and then look at places where they might need additional support and engage teams of educators and visits to each other and talking about, problems of practice and solving the problems. Our high schools also belong to, two of the high schools, Pasadena High School and Muir High School, belong to a group that was recommended by CAP that also does that similar kind of work. I know Shannon's on from the Magnet Grant, and maybe Shannon, you could speak a little bit about some of the interventions and supports that are at Muir High School.
Hi, everyone. At Muir High School, some of the additional supports that they have through the Magnet Grant include additional counselors. They also have an additional staff member to support positive behavior interventions and supports, and then additional funds for college textbooks, PSAT testing, and resources like that.
I also wanted to give Dr. Miller an opportunity to answer the attendance question, because he's had a full-on campaign this year, and unfortunately I think we would have seen really good results, but COVID-19 did come and put a stop to some of that. But Dr. Miller, would you like to report on some of the strategies that have been put in place?
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Blanco. And my apologies to everybody. I thought you had to watch me fix dinner for my dog. So I apologize for that. Thank you, Shahada, for the heads up. Yes, on the attendance, obviously there are some concerns. I did want to share with everybody that attendance is fixed at a February date. And I believe that date off the top of my head is February 28th. Beyond that, we are continuing to monitor our attendance, and we're looking at primarily students who are engaged. So we plan on a meeting, we're planning a meeting on Friday, working with our CWAS office to identify how we're going to pull together the data on attendance post-epidemic, and then how we're going to measure engagement, which I know that Dr. Blanco is also pulling together some of that data. Then we're going to figure out a way that we're going to report that out to everyone. And I hope that answers the question, Dr. Blanco.
oops, I'm on mute, that you've worked very closely with Collaborate, and home visits have been conducted, and that's been something that has been, really appreciated by the site administrators. And when administrators started finding out about it, they started requesting more support for their schools, and we were about to provide that, and then we were at our safer at home order.
Well, I know that we say collaborate, but I really have to give a shout out to Jeff. We talked about it in a collaborate meeting last year. Jeff picked it up and he really took it to the next level. In fact, including city officials and even the mayor coming out to acknowledge students who have improved their attendance. So yes, collaborate in partnership. Others, Young and Healthy, others who are part of the city have also jumped in to support us in our attendance goals. I'm particularly concerned about attendance in this epidemic, those students who may not be engaging, and then how do we reach out to them? Jeff and Dr. Sahakian and myself will be talking about that on Friday. Maybe putting together some goals, and then also outreach with our community engagement. So thank you for giving me an opportunity to shout out, give Collaborate a shout out, and give Jeff a shout out.
Thank you. And this is a perfect segue into a question that Kim had typed in a little while ago regarding those students affected by distance learning. And is there a plan to focus more funding on those students that have fallen further behind because of distance learning rather than extra custodians or enrichment programs for non-struggling students? And then after that, Laura also had a comment on distance learning too.
And I'm speaking specifically about supplemental and concentration funds.
Oh.
Process, as Dr. Miller mentioned, and trying to figure out the best ways to measure engagement and measure attendance. And I'll give you an example. There could be a student who is home reading a book that's really engaged in learning that's not logged on to PowerSchool. There could be another student that's logged on to PowerSchool but isn't really doing any of the work, right? And then there could be the student that is logged on and doing some of the work, and then ideally the student that's logged on and engaged in the work and completing assignments, right? So, and maybe there's a student that's engaged but not completing assignments. So there's many different scenarios, and we're in discussion with even national groups and LACO, I would say support groups that are experiencing the same types of situations that I described. I think what we have seen initially is we wanted to make sure that we gave everybody access. We were in a much better place than other districts. We still do have some students that need access, and we're working on that every day. Then we switched to, are people being taken care of, health-wise? Do they have social emotional needs? Do they have food needs? And how can we work with our community partners to get them what they need? And we have a pulse survey out there right now that is produced by Dr. Sahakian's department, and then also CIPD and myself gave some input on questions for teachers. So we can, take these measurements various times during this situation and try to figure out how people are doing socially, emotionally, what access they need, what help they still need. So in terms of what's next, I think, your question is appropriate. We have to come together, and we're assembling our groups to say, okay, so, we have to plan for 2 tracks of summer support. And we know that some of the programs that we traditionally have in the summer may not work for enrichment, and that affects children socially, emotionally, if they don't have those opportunities for enrichment. So I think, we're working on getting through the next step of the dual planning for summer, and beginning the conversation about what we're going to do to help students that are farther behind as a result of this, and what metrics we're going to use to measure if they're farther behind. And if we planned on doing diagnostics when they returned, and there's a chance that we may have a different program that is half in school or half out of school, or we may not get to return. How do we measure where the child is and give them, you know, exactly what they need? So it is on everyone's mind, and those are, you know, great questions. I think what we have always done is focus resources where we see there's students and families in need. You know, and Pasadena has, I don't want to say a luxury, but they have a lot more resources in the community that are geared towards helping students. I don't know if Nadira is still on, but we just put out some information about how students can access support and tutoring in math. So we're continuously looking for ways to support the students in the school district and through the community. And you know, we could always do better, and we always all want more for the children that we serve, right? And, you know, we're still in a situation in public education being, you know, I don't know, maybe we've moved up to 47th in funding in the United States, and one of the, you know, richest states in the country. And that is a problem for us across public education in California. But I would say that Pasadena does a much better job than many other places in making sure children have what they need, providing arts and enrichment activities, and really programs, you know, such as IB and other signature programs that children would only have an opportunity to take part in private schools.
There is also from Laura on the distance learning, proposing that we look at what we've developed now as far as distance learning, and seeing how we can use that for students that are possibly struggling to attend school for other reasons, to help them stay connected once we return back to, quote, real normal life.
If I could just add to that, one of the things that I've been very interested in for a long time is students who, for whatever reason, can't make it to school, whether it's illness on and off, or mental health issues, or parents not giving them transportation. But if they were home, they could maybe choose to work. Now that's become a little easier with Chromebooks and with more technology. And I know for programs like the Vanguard program at McKinley, it was easy for my son when he was down due to medical issues. But I guess I would just like to see us retain some of this capacity that we've developed, so that we can fill a little bit of that gap. It's still not going to give us the money of, you know, of the ADA that students would provide by actually showing up to school. So that doesn't solve that problem. But I'm always interested in making sure that students continue to learn, even when they can't physically be at school. So I just want to kind of put that on our list, so we don't forget that we do have the capacity. It may not be perfect once we come back, but we might do more than we've done in the past. That's all.
I think we all agree that we have certainly built our capacity in learning how to use technology, and you know that our teachers really have gone, you know, I would say above and beyond, and sometimes probably staying up into the wee hours of the night to learn the apps and provide for the students. So there will be opportunities for us to maybe provide extra support in a different way that we had not thought about before. So again, yeah, we're thinking about those things, and you know, we are talking about them every day. And you know, this has been moving, as you know, as parents and community members, pretty quickly, and we've had to make a lot of accommodations and adjustments along the way. And we're getting to the next phase where we do have to look at all of these questions that are being brought up about, closing the gap, providing extra resources. What have we learned? The superintendent is holding a focus group with the ELT, talking about what did we learn, what will we do differently, if in another crisis situation. So we're moving in that direction.
Oh.
So I did want to take a moment to address a question that I believe Kim had typed in regarding reports of students reading at grade level, which was about at 50%, and wondering if there were any more current or recent reports that have been generated. The answer to that is it depends. And as far as I'm not sure exactly which report you had mentioned. For example, I know that I pieced together some reports for the district-wide results considering IRI scores that were, I believe, from September to October. And then I had generated some IRI reports for school sites based on the January, February results. And then I was in the process of putting together a district-wide report, which then came up with both coinciding with one of our directors retiring from the state and federal programs and the COVID-19 outbreak. So I'd have to go back and look and see if I completed the district report on that particular assessment window. If it hasn't been completed, I can put that on my to-do list. It's just kind of perfect timing of all sorts of events happening and my role shifting within the organization. If you have seen that report, there is not planning on being a third IRI report. So I'm not, without knowing a little bit more context of which report you're referencing, I can't directly answer that question entirely.
I guess, David, in any of the reports over the last, I'll say 5 years that we have seen of the district level, it's been between 45 and 50% of the kids reading at grade level. And we have seen reports on elementary. I think we've seen a report on, I can't remember if it was middle school or high school. So I just wondered, is that kind of a given that about half of our kids are reading at grade level and half aren't, or has that been getting better? That I'm looking for whether we have been improving.
I would have to go back and look at the initial graphics of data representations that I had started to put together, because the answer to that is how I approach the report writing is I actually take the analysis and put it into visual formats first. And then that helps me to craft what's the actual reporting and narrative direction to take that in. Because I don't have those right in front of me, I can't say for certain if part of what I was looking at was the same across assessment 1 and assessment 2. I do know that the site-based reports that I did push out to principals did highlight for students that had both assessment 1 and assessment 2 scores based on placement levels with IRI, that these are the number of students that received this rating and then moved to a different rating. Without actually having it in front of me, I can't say what the percentages are right off the top of my head. But I do have access to some of that data that I can start putting together.
Thanks.
And looking at the translations, these are, I believe, suggestions for LAD to consider for the EL and coaching positions and at specific schools such as Madison, Blair, and Washington.
And I will be saving the chats for all this so we can archive it and then pass the recommendations on.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Would you like me to go through the listings that our DLAC president posted?
Sure.
I see that, thank you for the translation. It's pretty much a literal translation, so I'll go through the way it was typed. Definitely a request for a coach that takes care or oversees specifically the English learners at the school sites, classroom assistants in secondary and high school, in our ELA classes and ELD, community assistants, tutoring, a coach for both CIS and Rose City, that Madison and schools with a higher percentage of English learners have 2 coaches, that LAD oversee all coaches 100%. Let's see, support for our English learners, special need English learners so that they can reclassify. Real support for our LTELs so that not only they graduate successfully, but they are reclassified. Students that are at the International Academy at Blair, that they should return to their schools that they belong to as in their boundary after the 2 years as it was planned, that there be changes made to the International Academy because based on their results, they're very low for the students, and that there needs to be more support at the schools with a higher percentage of English learners, for example, Madison, Blair, and Washington. I could say some of these, if not all of these, have been a part of our recommendations and suggestions that we proposed. As far as a coach just for English learners at the school sites, we would need to work definitely with administration to make sure that that's something that can take place. It is. We did recommend that there be an instructional assistant, bilingual instructional assistant at the secondary school levels, middle and high school. I stated that earlier. It's my understanding that a majority of the schools have community assistants. Tutoring is taking place at the schools that want it. We offered it to all schools the past couple years that I've been in LAD. I'm barely in my 3rd year at LAD. So the years that I've been at LAD, we have provided tutoring to all schools that are interested. 2 coaches for Madison and schools with more EL. Well, from my understanding, I believe Madison is going to acquire 2 coaches. As far as another coach for the schools with a higher population, that should be discussed. Taking over the control of all the coaches, that could be in discussion. Total support for English learners from special ed. Working with Dr. Liu as well as her TOSAs, we have definitely put the students with special needs, the English learners with special needs on the forefront and utilizing the VCALPs and the students' IEPs and goals to make sure that not only that their goals are realistic, but they're linguistically targeting the needs that they have. We are working with the coaches as well as the TOSAs to make sure that that's in fact taking place. We do work hand in hand with LACO, and they provide a number of webinars, or before we went to remote working, a number of trainings that we did send coaches and TOSAs to so that they could come back and we can learn what it is that they were taught, and then we can spread it across the district. Dr. Blanco shared briefly in that my department did visit the high schools and we provided substitutes to the ELD teachers, and then myself and Renee, and as well as the APs and the coaches at the secondary school sites, met with each ELD teacher one at a time, and we went through the long list of EL students that they had that are now identified as LTELs. And it was not just a discussion of the data that we all have. It was basically also just finding out more about the student and what it is that's preventing them from being reclassified. So we did make great progress on that. And of course, now having gone to remote working, it's not something that's going to stop, but of course the challenges are there. As far as the International Academy, those discussions would have to take place if that is to be in fact implemented, if the students return to their home schools. And I think that's just about everything that's addressed there. Sorry if I went over. Either Jeff or David. I think there's another one that's after me.
Okay, let me see. So there's a question from Laura about dyslexia screenings, and I'm just letting everybody know that we are approaching the end. So maybe address this and then we wrap it up for the evening.
I can speak a little bit to what I know of, that there are some schools that participate in a universal screening process, and that universal screener does look for signs of dyslexia in addition to other issues that teachers might need to be made aware of specifically for students that may impact their academic performance at elementary schools. Because I have traditionally been a high school teacher, I can't speak to everything that is available at the elementary schools. So I may need to ask Dr. Blanco to clarify or add on to a little bit of my response. But I can say that there is a form of a universal screener that has been provided. How comprehensive that is in singling out dyslexia, I don't have any research on that right now, and I think that there might be a few other assessment tools that we may have at our disposal that Dr. Blanco would be able to talk a little bit more about.
So Senator Portantino was sponsoring a bill to address universal screening for dyslexia. I'm not sure, where that is in the legislative process, given everything that's occurred. I did, request that he put that it had funding behind it, because we, can't continue to have unfunded mandates. There was a bill passed that focused on students with disabilities and dyslexia, and the state rolled out a whole plan. They had several researchers available over, I think it was a 1 or 2 year period developing the plan, but they didn't give us significant resources to be able to implement the plan. But the special ed department has adopted some procedures in helping psychologists with assessments, and then also some diagnostics, and then treatment plans. One program is Aspire, and they sent me a recommendation for another program they would like to use over the summer that they felt could also address this. So I think if this bill does come to pass, we will look to the special education department and, figure out what's been working and not working and helping students with IEPs in this area. So lastly, I see that Natasha brought up that there is not a community assistant at every school, and is suggesting that we do put them back into the budget as a central funded position. I think it's important to remember with declining enrollment, there were, I would say, two different perceptions. One's that schools got money taken away from them, but in reality, there's less money to give to everybody. So departments got money taken away from them too. And in terms of that central support being a cut from the LCAP, it does not prevent a school from using their discretionary site money to, continue these positions. In some cases, schools had the positions and we were able to make them full-time. I definitely agree that they're very helpful, and schools that don't have them really miss them. Dr. Miller is a strong advocate for putting community assistance back into the LCAP as well. I think, what Dr. Barnes tells us when we come with all these new ideas is there's not additional funds. So what would you like to prioritize and what are we taking out to be able to fund what is a priority? And those are the same processes that school site councils go through. But when we have less students, we have less money to go around, right? And we're like so happy that we were finally getting out of the conversations that were deficit all the time. And then this occurred, so we're, not sure what the future is going to bring us, but we can certainly look at all of the recommendations and, prioritize. That was the process we were going to go through as an ELT after we had all the recommendations from the stakeholders, and look at that question, right? What is the trade-off to have some of the things back that were very valuable and helpful to the school sites? So I'm looking at Suzanne wrote per community assistant roster. Elizabeth just posted there are 9 vacant community assistant positions. So that must mean that some of them promoted or moved on, and we'll be filling those vacancies because they still exist. So I know we're coming to the end of this meeting. I don't know if anybody would like to make any final closing comments. We will take all of this under consideration and add it to the collection of data that we have regarding stakeholder involvement. Our next steps will be to bring back some of the information that has been requested tonight in terms of metrics and keep you updated as the budget progresses.
I did want to just make one final closing remark and say thank you to everyone who took the time to participate in this meeting. It means a lot, and it gives us a source of information that we wouldn't otherwise be able to tap into. And as someone who's very involved in this process, I just want to say thank you on behalf of myself and the rest of the individuals at PUSD.
Yes, thank you everybody for joining us. And just to let you know, a recording of this conversation will be on our website as soon as the recording's been processed, collaboratepasadena.org/LCAP, or right under Get Involved. There will be copies of the presentation, the agenda, other LCAP documents. So I will put the recording right up to the top. And as new documents and new things come along, I'll make sure they're posted there too.
Thanks, everyone.
And thank you, Jeff, for hosting.
Oh, absolutely. And if somebody hasn't signed their name in the chat box, if you came in a little bit late, if you could just put your name in the chat box, we'll use that as an attendance roster.